On today's show, is Yegor Chinakhov the right fit for the Capitals?
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, the news continues to swirl about former Capital Evgeny Kuznetsov. Where will he land? We've heard about the Canadiens. I've heard different things about the Canucks. Where would a good landing spot for Kuzi be? I'll talk about that a bit later. Talking about some big moves that the Capitals should make this summer, as they have not made a lot of big moves, depth moves, if you will. Would Jordan Kyrou be the dream splash move for the Capitals? But just to get it going here, the big talk about there, the Chinakhov opportunity, as it doesn't seem like he was a good fit with Columbus, a little bit of a rift with Dean Evason, got injured, came back, saw limited ice time, was a healthy scratch. In the latter part of the season, that's the big talk out there, right? Is that Chinakhov says that he wants out of Columbus, and right away, teams that didn't make a big splash this summer so far are just swinging like, yes, let's do it. Or at least that is the talk out there. We don't know if there has been real talks yet between Chris Patrick and his representation, but it would be a splash, yes. And I'll drill down to more of a granular level here if it's the right move, because he does appear to be a bit of a, for lack of a better term, a bit of a head case as well. There's some upside. He sounds disgruntled with his team and the injury and Dean Evason and the rift there. Is he going to be the right fit in the locker room? And, you know, one of the things that we talked about last season was the chemistry, the vibes around the team that, and I'm just going based on what I've heard about Chinakhov here, what kind of guy he was. Would he be the right fit in DC? Let's dive into that in segment number 1, because the Capitals fans, and maybe to a certain extent, the leadership of this team, I think, is a bit desperate to make a big move. In the last couple episodes, I talked about the depth moves. I'm talking Declan Chisholm, Justin Sordiff, these kind of players. But I think the Capitals fans are longing for more, a bigger swing. Would Chinakhov be that bigger swing? So let's talk about that. Chris Patrick said himself at the end of the season presser, the Caps want more skill in this lineup. Not grit, not just two-way guys, a skilled player. And that was one of the things that the Capitals are looking for, as ostensibly this is going to be Alex Ovechkin's final year in the NHL, and they want more skilled players. There is an abundance of young talent that will be joining this team in years to come, not to mention some of the skilled players that are on this team right now. But I think the Capitals got exposed, at least to a certain extent, about having not enough skill when it mattered. And I think this team, like I said, is kind of desperate to make a big move after swinging and missing on like Nikolaj Ehlers and free agency. And the trade market now is front and center. That, free agency is all open now, right? It was July 1st that free agents could reach out to teams. The representation could reach out to teams and vice versa. And a lot of the big names have been taken off the board. But to be clear here, I don't think that Chinakhov was one that was thought to be on the move. I just think that, he said that he wants out of Columbus. And then all of a sudden, I think that piqued everyone's interest. Like, we didn't get our guy. Maybe this is a good opportunity to try go out and acquire a big name player. And Yegor Chinakhov rather just asked out of Columbus. And his agent, Shumi Babayev, who, by the way, also reps Kuzi, isn't that interesting, went public with the request. Don Waddell, Columbus's GM, confirmed it too, said they've talked about it. And I think that Columbus is a team that is in transition. And all things considered, taking a look at how they played last season, exceeded a lot of people's expectations. That despite, the potential rift between Chinakhov and Dean Evason, former Capitals assistant coach, that he got some results out of his players. That's quite an accomplishment. And I think that, kind of looking back on Kuznetsov and different players that have been on the Capitals before, if there's a player that doesn't want to be here or just doesn't seem like a good fit, then they want to move them. I think that's the case for Columbus. But, what kind of, makes me a bit cautious about adding him to the Capitals, that if it didn't fit there, would he be a good fit for the Capitals? So now, why does this matter to our team? Well, first off, Chinakhov's 24, so fits the narrative or the script of being younger, a former first-round pick, and actually was pacing for a 55-point season before his back injury. And so some pretty good upside, 55 points. I think that could be what the Capitals are looking for. The big question for me is, where would he fit? And would that roadblock, a younger player that is deserving a look? Now, again, this is just speculative. This is a big name that we just somewhat recently found out that could be available. But, after returning from that injury, Dean Evason gave him barely 12 minutes a night. Healthy scratched, like I said off the top, 12 of the last 17 games. Yikes. So that is the red flag that's going off for me. Like, what did Dean Evason see? Was it a personal thing? Was it that he wasn't the same player that he was before the injury? That, I think, is what would require a little bit more deeper investigation. I might have to reach out to Locked On Blue Jackets on that. But interesting, a guy that appears to have a pretty good upside. But would he be a good fit for the Capitals? He most of the time plays on the right wing, but with a lot of those guys, they're a bit interchangeable. So, you could see him slot in there potentially, maybe a bottom six role. I guess it depends where he's going to fit in. There's Ryan Leonard in the mix and sort of these kind of guys, and not to mention Wilson, Protas, these kind of guys that, I don't think the Capitals want to go out and make an acquisition like this as just a depth move. I think that there needs to be a real clear fit for him on the roster. So that would be interesting. Now, the Caps have about $4.1 million in cap space. And to be clear here, that's plenty to fit Chinakhov's $2.1 million cap hit. He's in the second year of his deal. RFA next summer. Super low risk somewhat, right? And if I want to paint a picture, I hope that you guys can see this in your mind about the potential good that could come from it. But, the cautionary part that, put up good points, limited ice time after his injury. Why the limited ice time? Like I said, was it a rift between him and Evason? Was it due to a lack of production on the ice? Like I said, I think that Columbus is looking for a change, and I think that they will be taking pretty big steps forward next season. And here's the kicker, kind of, is the familiarity thing, and being familiar with an organization. To me, I guess I understand it to an extent, but you oftentimes hear a lot about that. You heard about Pierre-Luc Dubois being familiar with some Capitals players, Matt Roy, these kind of guys, that when there's that familiar factor, that oftentimes I think that makes it a little bit more comfortable. And Chinakhov knows assistant coach Kenny McCudden from his Columbus days. He's also from the same avant-garde Omsk pipeline is Ivan Miroshnichenko. So there is a familiar factor there. I mean, I guess I don't know the relationship there too well, but if that is going to make it a little bit easier for him to come here, if in fact this is where he wants to come, then I think that would be a good thing. This is somewhat recently breaking here. I record these shows a little bit in advance in the summer, is that I'm not super in love with it. I know that there is quite a bit of buzz on social media from different people about, wow, this could be a perfect fit for the Capitals. But, widen the lens a little bit. There's a lot of teams. I saw the Bruins, other teams that are chomping at the bit as well. So I do see the offensive upside. It's just not the move that I think that I was hoping for. So, this might actually make too much sense for the Capitals. Would you do it? Would you give him maybe a bottom 6 forward and mid 6 round pick? What would the Capitals have to give up? The fact that he is in the second year of his deal, RFA next summer. Those are the things that make me not love it. I think that if they could get it at a low risk move, they don't have to give up a whole lot to get him here. Okay. I'm not chomping at the bit. I don't have that same intensity that some of the other Capitals beat writers that I've seen, that some of them are just like all giddy over this thought. I understand the upside. I understand his scoring potential, just maybe not the fit that I think for the Capitals that a lot of other people might see. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about another potential player, Jordan Kyrou. This player gets me a little bit more excited. I'll break down the latest straight ahead. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little bit more thrilling with FanDuel? You can get on the game with your friends while they're getting sunburned at the beach. Listen, the Nationals aren't having the season that they're looking for, or maybe you're an Orioles fan. But maybe you want vested interest in all of these games. Open up the FanDuel app, put a little bit of money on these games. All of a sudden, they got that much more exciting. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and a fun way to bet. It's easy to use, fast way to pay out, and makes every regular season game feel like a must-watch event. So are you new to FanDuel? New customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in segment 2 here, we're talking about Jordan Kyrou. Now, this is a player that has me a little bit more excited about the potential of an upgrade for the Capitals, as I think they are still looking to make a big splash. I know that they've said they want to lean into the youth, and ultimately I think that's because they're kind of pivoting and saying, listen, if we can't find anyone else, or if it's not an upgrade enough over the current talent that we have internally, then we're A-okay with going with what we have right now. But let's make it clear here. I think that if the right opportunity presented itself, the Capitals would be game for doing that. So let's talk about that in segment number 2. Here is Jordan Kyrou, the dream splash. The St. Louis Blues are open to moving him. And yeah, it's not just a rumor. This isn't Dan just making up stuff in the summer. That came straight from Frank Saravalli, formerly of the Daily Faceoff and now the Bleacher Report. So why would they want to move a 70-point winger who's still just 27? Well, just like everything else in life, money and opportunity. That if you take a look at the Blues, they seemed dead last season. Coaching change gave them some new life. And I think that they are looking to move some pieces. It's a financial thing, right? Just like every other team out there. It's kind of a chess match. You got to move this player to, just to get under budget, those kind of things. And they've got Jimmy Snuggerud coming up through the ranks. So I think that for them, they feel like he could potentially be a better fit. And it's about prioritization of certain players. Think of it like Washington moving on from a veteran to make room for Ryan Leonard. Same kind of deal. So I think that, a potential, I guess I'm going to say loss, but it kind of seems like the Blues are fine for it, could be the gain of a team like the Capitals. But, you take a look at it, it's a bit of a richer deal. And just like I talked about Chinakhov in the first segment, it has me a bit concerned, I guess you could say, as the amount of money required. Now, Kyrou's deal, I mean, there's no ands, ifs about it. 8.125 million AAV, and it runs through 2031. So yeah, that's a long one, and a no trade clause just kicked into, so he'd have to agree to come to DC. So the 70 points, that is rather intriguing, but and I know that it kind of goes back and forth with me on the show. You got to do what you got to do in modern hockey. You got to give them the term. You got to give them the money. But that is a big hit, and it runs through 2031. I understand the upside, but when you take a look at it, do they want to have a player sign? 27's not old, but it's not really young either, if you know what I'm talking about, in consideration of like Crystal, Leonard, this kind of thing. So, 27, I guess I'm fine with. The 2031 and the AAV is what has me concerned. So that is a long one. And that no trade clause is interesting. But here's why it could work. Familiarity. Remember me talking about that in segment 1? Kyrou played with Jacob Chychrun in the juniors. He's familiar with Pierre-Luc Dubois from Team Canada, and the Caps are still searching for that top 6 winger. So I understand that. I mean, I'm not trying to overlook the stats. I get it. They're glowing. I mean, I need to put on sunglasses to look at them. They're good. 70 points. The 2031 part of it, I don't like. That's more than a capital not named Ovechkin, if you know what I mean. That is, getting into some serious money. And, maybe I think to a certain extent why people are drawing lines is because they know, that potentially this could be Ovi's last season. But taking a look at his numbers a little bit more specifically, even strength production, he's a top 30 in the league. Better than Forsberg, Ratton, and even Ovi in recent seasons. Again, I get it. I know people are going to say, Dan, have you seen his stats? I get all that. 2031, it's a lot. I think that if the Capitals could finagle it somehow, some way, of course, it would be a nice upgrade. I think that would be what the Capitals are looking for. But it's a big bite out of that apple. So the question is if you're Chris Patrick, you missed on Ehlers, do you make the move? And I still think that Chris Patrick wants to put his stamp on this team to prove to, leadership, ownership, that I can pull off a big move. So it's going to be interesting to see if he goes out and puts his stamp on this team and tries to go make a big acquisition. Again, the big extensions, I'm talking Chychrun and Logan Thompson, he has still yet has not gone out and got his great white whale, if you know what I mean. But you'd have to clear salary. And you think about it, what kind of players would come out of the mix to accommodate that? But, you take a look at it, just kind of penciled in Ovi, Strome, Kyrou. That's interesting. That's fun. That's fast. That's dangerous. That could be formidable. But Capitals fans, hit me up on Twitter. Would you say yes to Kyrou? Who knows? But if he does, the Caps better be ready to pounce. So we don't know if he would entertain the idea of coming to the Capitals. Again, a big upgrade. And I understand it's just part and parcel of modern professional sports that you got to kind of give these upper echelon guys what they're looking for, or you're just simply going to go to a team where you will get that. If they could find a way to finagle it, move out some pieces to, do some Brian McClellan, the former GM magic, and make it happen and amaze us. Like, wow, I didn't consider moving this player and that player and spreading it out. And all of a sudden it works. If they can do that, I'm all about it. But I'm wary of the 2031 and the AAV. It'll be interesting to see what kind of moves Chris Patrick pulls off, or if he pulls the trigger on a guy like Jordan Kyrou. All right, so coming up here after the break, Evgeny Kuznetsov. Yeah, I know he hasn't been here for a while, but his name permeates through the cap sphere. He's going to go to Montreal. No, he might go to the Canucks. What's the latest with Evgeny Kuznetsov? I'll discuss next. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. In the final segment, we're talking about the Birdman. We're talking about Evgeny Kuznetsov and his potential landing spot in the 2025-2026 season. What do we know? He kind of keeps bringing it home. He played in that beer league game at MedStar that still kind of coming home. And, he knows where home is for him, I think, at the end of the day. And felt comfortable coming back here, was wearing a Russian, I forget the team's jersey, but he flashed. And it had to be kind of a cool moment for those beer leaguers that were playing. All of a sudden you're playing your game and all of a sudden Kuznetsov comes on the ice. It's got to be an eye-opener. But what is the latest with Evgeny Kuznetsov? A guy that started his career on a high note with the Capitals, said I could be the best player in the league if I wanted to. Inconsistent players assistance program, went down to Hershey, then went out to the Canes, went over to the KHL, now wants back to the NHL. Hold on to your seat. There's a lot to get to here in the final segment. So let's talk about Evgeny Kuznetsov and the latest rumblings with him. And he wants back into the NHL. And yes, his agent is talking to teams. Well, that's what Kuznetsov pays him for. He just spent one season back in Russia, which I thought was going to be a good fit. Go home, some familiarity. But it turns out didn't play that well there either. But you take a look at his numbers that he put up, 37 points in 39 games for the SKA. But there were 2 concussions and, some locker room drama. They literally took his locker out before the playoffs. Yikes. If you want to sign that you're not welcome here anymore, I think that is it. Now, you take a look at his stats. They were pretty good, but, the talk from Russia was that they had hoped for more. That this Evgeny Kuznetsov was going to come here and just change our team. As it turns out, he was a little bit the same way that he was with the Capitals, a bit of, a little bit of extra, shall we say. Now, here's the thing. Kuznetsov's not asking for a contender, not even asking for big money, just wants a team that, quote unquote, needs him. He doesn't want to come to a team on a PTO, a professional tryout. He's not entertaining the idea of playing in the American Hockey League. Are there teams out there that would take a flyer on him? You got to think so. If it's not about money and he doesn't really care where he plays, even though he's kind of said he doesn't want to come back to the Capitals, and we don't want him anyway, I think, a team, like the Sabres, the Ducks, the teams that are looking to kind of re-jump, the Ottawa Senators, teams like that I think that there is a team out there that could take a flyer on him. Why not? I think that's kind of telling. So we've even seen him, like I said, around DC this summer, hanging with Alexiev, playing that beer league at MedStar. And now this guy, he does, Kuzi does want back because why? I think he realizes that he made a mistake. But should the NHL teams even consider it? His last NHL season was rough, 24 points in 63 games, split between the Caps and Canes. But the skill, it's still there. That doesn't go away. And, the thing of it is I kind of believe what he says when he says I could be the best player if I wanted to be. Maybe not the best player, but I think that he could be a very good player if he applied himself. For some reason, it just seems like Kuzi gets disinterested, and that's when the wheel starts to wobble for him there. But, on a 1-year deal, cheap, no drama, Maybe it works somewhere, maybe it doesn't. But if he's motivated, it could be a huge value play for a team around the NHL. Somewhat here recently, some people have said that, he's not absolutely against coming to the Capitals. That was the common thought there when he first announced it, but then there's been kind of rumors, I guess you could say. I have to address those as well, that maybe. I don't think that there's a possibility that Kuzi comes back to the Capitals, but is there a team out there that would be willing to take a bite on a former first-round player? I think absolutely. It's just, the right fit, and where is he going to fit? Because, at his best, like I said, he could be a game changer. And I don't ever, want to forget what he did in 2018, key piece, integral in the Stanley Cup win. But, in the latter part of his time with the Capitals, he waned. And then there was, like I said, excuse me, the players assistance program that it kind of draws into question, where's his head at? And he's really into it right now in July. But where is he going to be if he's playing on a team and he's not playing in the top six? Maybe has to play on the fourth line. Is his ego going to get in the way? And is he going to have an attitude? There's a lot of minds to navigate for a team that signs up for a guy like Evgeny Kuznetsov. I know that Locked On Canucks did an episode on him here the other day, but a lot to take on, a lot of extra, if you will. But I think that if a team is willing to take a flyer on him, and if, Kuzi, I'd have to have a conversation, say I'm the GM and he's sitting across to me, look at me. Are you hearing what I'm saying? You're going to take the role that we give you. Right? That it could be on the first line, it could be the fourth line. And I don't want to hear about it. If we're going to sign you to a contract, I don't want the baggage that followed you to the Capitals and then subsequently over to the KHL. Go out there and execute, or I have zero problems bearing you in the American Hockey League. I would make it abundantly clear because I think that, most of the teams out there, they have the leverage. He's, I'm going to say it, a bit desperate at this point to land a spot in the NHL, kind of, all over the place, right? That, another team sense that. Otherwise, I think that as soon as his agent kind of put the word out there, that another team would have just jumped on him. And I'm not going to say that a team's not going to jump on him. It's just that I would clearly lay out my expectations if I was the GM of the team of wherever he plans to go. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.